Hello everyone, my name is Jason Greer and I chose to do my THIRA project on the location of Las Vegas, Nevada. Here we go. THIRA, in general, it is a three-step process which identifies the threat and hazard analysis and the risk assessment for any kind of hazard in the area. In this case, we're using a three-step process in which we are identifying on how this can affect our community, and if they occur, what impacts do they have on said community. We're also going to be looking into how can we prepare and what capabilities should our community have beforehand. The three different actual hazards that we are looking at are the natural, technological, and human caused. I chose to focus mainly on the natural aspect of it, dealing with earthquakes, floods, wildfires, droughts, and pandemics. Earthquakes in general are a big area of which we live a part of. We are near multiple fault lines in this southwest area, including the biggest one of the San Andreas Fault. With this area being located in the desert, this is a area in which deals with flooding quite often. During the summer months, usually between July and September, this aspect becomes a very real possibility. The location itself being that it is an isolated and nearby on sediment rock, this is prone to not accepting water into its foundation. The rock sediment itself actually transfers the water around and actually pulls it up into an area in which it can't actually remove itself. This actually would occur a lot in flash floodings, which typically kills around 30 to 100 people per year in this area. During those summer months as well, it does get extremely hot from the areas around up to 100 degrees up to 120. With this in mind, wildfires are actually very common. Being that it's so dry, so desolate, it is not easy to put out fires in the middle of the desert. This would also coincide with it being of the drought. When it does rain, it will rain and flood rather quickly, but when it becomes a next week situation, it is very dry and fires typically occur right after those droughts. I also chose to put pandemics in the natural aspect, as obviously we see with the coronavirus itself. This actually is situated between person to person conduct. With this location being so isolated, people tend to congregate all together. This in mind, being that those hotels, the strip, and actually quite a lot of people that actually live there full time, this would be mitigated with a ton of people having that pandemic if it's not treated accordingly. The technological hazards I chose mainly on the hazmat release and any kind of dam failure. This is actually located nearby to the Hoover Dam, which is only roughly 60 miles away. The dam actually does provide electricity for this area as long as the energy aspect of it. If either one of those were to fail, this would become very problematic, as Arizona, Southern California, and Nevada rely on that energy from the dam. Hazardous material as well. One can do any kind of attack, whether to its water supply or to inflict harm. This would be very easy, as I have said already for the pandemics. People tend to congregate, and this can become a very problematic aspect in any kind of hazardous way you can think of. We have seen already a human caused incident in Las Vegas. We can see that active shooters typically go for the most areas of harm in which they can identify and, of course, harm and kill whoever is in their way. Being that this is an isolated area, people, like I've said, have tended to congregate, which actually creates more harm in the long run. Cyber attacks are something to think of when dealing with like the dam as well as the energy aspect from the Hoover Dam, but also the heating and cooling of like hotels in that area. One could be able to hack into that area and create harm if they wish to, along with terrorism, as in along the strip, one could do a lot of harm by taking a vehicle and ramming people, or overall just causing harm and blowing something up. With the strip being a very congregated aspect, this could be this could be done very easily if one actually wanted to do some harm. Some of the hazards I chose to identify were the earthquake, the floods, dam failure, drought, and any kind of pandemic. Earthquakes in this aspect are very high probability, mainly because this aspect of Nevada and California have been waiting for a big one of over 7.0 earthquake for the past 60 years. This is something that we typically get every 30 years, but obviously we're 3 decades past that. So we're kind of waiting for it to happen, and hopefully we can be at least somewhat prepared for it. The floods, I've said in general, this location is very desolate, and because of its location on the rock aspect, this kind of flooding is going to be somewhat of a problem. With flash flooding occurring every few months, being that in July through September, this is something that we are able to kind of predict in the aspect of where they're going to be. Any kind of mitigating hazard we can do for that probability would be to identify and situate ourselves in areas in which we can at least respond effectively. Dam failures would be along with the Hoover Dam, and with this aspect, we're looking to at least have some kind of electricity if something were to go wrong. The, the drought aspect would be something very high, as we're now becoming in a new normal of currently 19 years of having drought conditions, and as of right now, it's not looking like it's going to get any better rather soon. But the whole thing we're looking for is we're needing the water to create that energy. If we're not having the energy to create that water, and we don't have the water to actually give out towards the people of Las Vegas as well as the surrounding cities, this is going to be very problematic, not only for the energy aspect, of course, the Las Vegas aspect of tourism, but also the farming communities that rely on this water. And without the water and the drought, this is going to be very problematic. Pandemics, in this case, this can be a medium to high. I chose to do it in the medium aspect, as we are currently obviously going through the coronavirus, and I've yet to hear of any kind of like infections in that area. Being that it is still getting into the spring break aspect and we haven't truly hit summer yet, this could be pushed up into a high aspect rather soon, as people tend to obviously go on vacation right about now, and we will see rather soon if this can be motivated to a high. And with that, we have to mitigate our health standards as well as how would we mitigate towards a pandemic. Some of the capability targets we have for the earthquakes, we would have to deal with mitigating any kind of hazards through the Hoover Dam. This could create major problems if this would actually were to become a disaster area in which we would lose water, energy, as well as most likely flooding in the area of all around Las Vegas. This aspect could become highly detrimental to the city and community of Las Vegas, as this is something they heavily rely on, as well as the money, tourism, and jobs for that area. In this case, we'd be also setting capability targets for the flooding channels that would be established and designed to mitigate those flash floods. We would be looking to mitigate any kind of hazards as well as the storm drain aspect, mainly because if we can easily identify where we want the flash floods to go, we can actually remove people out of that area for the future. This could also mitigate lives that could be saved before they even happen. One of the problems I had with the dam failure is the easiest way to consider that would be inspecting and completing those reports and installing ground sensors towards that dam, and that would also give us an early warning system if something were to occur, and we would have to mitigate that. The drought aspects I chose also, if we would want to focus on the housing aspect and the planning for that. We would need to identify and localize any kind of conservation aspects of trying to save any water that we could, as well as opening up wells in that localized area. But we would also need to consider the planning for housing of those people that would need to in that area. Uh, Elderlies, children of young ages that wouldn't have the energy to do so, we would also be able to possibly put them up in the hotels and kind of secure housing for those who would need it, as well as also moving people towards coastal communities such as Arizona and Southern California. The pandemic aspect, we would also be looking at creating medical zones for this aspect, as well as isolating those people who would be affected, and we would also try to prevent any kind of evacuation or large scale evacuation towards other areas in fear of spreading other kind of diseases. In this case, we would also work hand in hand with the CDC on how to mitigate and how a cure can be administered and sent out towards other people. The top threats that I chose, again, earthquakes are the most logical. This is something we're already overdue for, and I could see this becoming a threat rather soon. Flooding, this could be just more of the actual rain flood, but also the Hoover Dam, in which if something were to happen with that, water obviously would be coming down towards us. And pandemics, we've seen the coronavirus moves rather quickly, so this could be something we would have to identify and localize if needed. In conclusion, like I've just stated, an earthquake is already long overdue. This is something that we should be preparing for, as well as mitigating with building new construction, something that could actually withstand larger scale earthquakes versus what we've seen in other areas such as wood construction, like in Tennessee, and just overall brick and mortar buildings that aren't capable of withstanding that kind of earthquake Richter scale aspect. The biggest thing that does help and also hinders its aspect is Las Vegas is very isolated, and with that in mind, any kind of problems they have would be localized into that one immediate area. The biggest downfall of it actually is also its localized area, being that it's so isolated. Any kind of help would be at least a few hours out. This is something where we would have to mitigate in the future, as well as possibly create other ways in which one could prevent or respond towards a disaster.